The wind screamed through the Montana plains that winter of 1875, a banshee's wail that carried the promise of death to anyone foolish enough to stand against it. Snow piled high against the walls of Eliza Thornton's crumbling cabin, a fragile shield between her little family and the merciless cold. Inside, the fire was a pitiful thing, spitting and hissing as it devoured the last scraps of wood, barely warming the three souls huddled within. Eliza sat by the hearth, her calloused hands trembling as she stitched a tear in her son's shirt, her breath visible in the dim light of a single, flickering candle. She was 32, but the lines etched into her face told a story of a woman who'd lived twice that long, widowed, worn, and weary, fighting to keep a roof over her children's heads. Clara, her 10-year-old daughter, knelt on the rough floorboards nearby, her small fingers threading a needle through an old blanket, patching it with the determination that broke Eliza's heart. Samuel, just 8, stacked firewood with a quiet resolve, his thin arms straining under the weight of each log. They were children, yes, but the West had stolen their childhood, replacing it with chores and worries no young soul should bear. 3 dairy cows stood shivering in the barn, their milk too scant to sell, and a weak calf lay beside them, its survival a gamble against the odds. The mortgage loomed like a vulture overhead, circling closer with each passing day, ready to snatch away the only home they had left. Eliza's thoughts were a storm of their own, swirling with the fear of what tomorrow might bring. Daniel had been her rock, her partner in this unforgiving land, until pneumonia claimed him last winter, leaving her alone with 2 mouths to feed and a farm that refused to yield. She'd sold off most of their livestock to pay the doctor, but it hadn't been enough to save him or to save them from the debt that followed. Now, every creak of the cabin's timbers felt like a taunt, every gust of wind a reminder of how close they were to ruin. A particularly vicious blast shook the walls, and the fire flared briefly before sinking lower, casting eerie shadows across the room. Clara's head snapped up, her blue eyes wide with the fear she tried to hide. "Mama, is the storm getting worse?" she asked, her voice small against the howling outside. Eliza forced a smile, thin and brittle as the ice on the window panes. "It's just the wind, sweetheart. We're safe here." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Safe, hardly. The cabin groaned under the weight of the snow, and she knew it wouldn't take much a broken beam, a collapsed roof to leave them at the mercy of the elements. Samuel, ever the dreamer, looked up from his pile of wood, his cheeks flushed from the cold. "Maybe it'll pass soon. Mama, maybe tomorrow the sun'll come out, and we can build a snowman." Her chest tightened at his hope. So pure and fragile. "Maybe, Sam," she said softly. "We'll see." She was about to tell them to crawl under their blankets and try to sleep when a sound pierced the night, a heavy thud against the front door, sharp and urgent, cutting through the wind's relentless cry. Eliza froze, her needle hovering above the fabric. Clara and Samuel stared at her, their faces pale as the snow outside. What was that? Clara whispered, clutching her blanket tighter. "Stay here," Eliza said, rising to her feet, her voice steady despite the sudden gallop of her heart. She reached for the rifle above the fireplace, its cold metal a familiar weight in her hands. Daniel's gift, a lesson in survival she'd never wanted to learn. She crept toward the door, her breath shallow, every step echoing with the questions racing through her mind. A neighbor, a traveler, or something worse, an outlaw, drawn by the faint glow of their candlelight. Another thud, weaker now, followed by a low, pained groan. Someone was out there, hurting, maybe dying. Eliza's hand hovered over the latch, torn between the instinct to protect her children and the pull of compassion she couldn't shake. They had so little herbs she'd hoarded for sickness, a single pot of soup meant to stretch through the week. But to leave a soul to freeze on her doorstep felt like a sin she couldn't bear. She took a deep breath, the icy air stinging her lungs, and yanked the door open. The wind roared in, nearly tearing the wood from her grip. And there he was, a man, crumpled against the porch, his face ghostly white beneath a mask of blood and snow. His coat was soaked, his hands pressed against his side where a dark stain bloomed, seeping through his fingers. "Help me," he rasped, his voice a threadbare whisper, his eyes locking onto hers with a desperation that pierced her to the core. Eliza stood rooted, the rifle trembling in her grip. He was a stranger, wounded and wild-looking, a man who could be anything: friend, foe, or harbinger of doom. The blood told a story of violence, and in these parts, violence rarely traveled alone. But those eyes, hazel, clouded with pain, yet burning with something fierce, begged for mercy. And she couldn't look away. "Clara, Samuel, help me," she said, lowering the rifle and stepping into the storm. Together, they dragged him inside, his body a dead weight against their straining arms. They laid him on the rug by the fire, and Eliza knelt beside him, peeling back his torn shirt to reveal the wound, a bullet hole, raw and ugly, a testament to some unseen battle fought in the dark. "Clara, fetch the medicine box. Samuel, boil water," she ordered, her mind snapping into focus. She'd learned a bit of healing from her mother poultices, stitches, prayers, but this was a test beyond her skill. Still, she couldn't let him die. Not here, not now. The children obeyed, their movements quick and silent, as Eliza rummaged for her pouch of herbs, dried yarrow and comfrey. Worth more than gold in a winter like this. She pressed a cloth to his side, the blood warm against her cold fingers, and began to work, her hands steady even as her heart raced. He groaned, his head lolling as his eyes fluttered open. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice rough but earnest. "Save your strength," she replied, her tone sharp yet softened by a flicker of kindness. "You're not out of this yet." A faint smile tugged at his lips, then faded as he slipped back into the dark. Hours slipped by, the storm a relentless roar outside as Eliza cleaned and bandaged the wound, the children watching with wide, wondering eyes. The fire crackled, the only sound within, as she fed him the last of their soup, spooning it into his mouth when he stirred again. "Who is he?" Mama Samuel asked, peering at the stranger's weathered face. "I don't know," she admitted, wiping her hands on her apron. "But he needed us, and that's enough for now." Clara nodded, her voice soft but sure. Like the Good Samaritan, Eliza's lips curved, though the weight of the night pressed heavy on her shoulders. Something like that. As dawn crept closer, the storm showed no sign of relenting, but the man's breathing grew steady, his chest rising and falling beneath her makeshift bandages. She settled into a chair beside him, the rifle within reach, her eyes tracing the lines at his face. Trouble had come knocking, she knew that much. But something told her this stranger, with his quiet gratitude and haunted gaze, might be more than just a burden. The West was a land of hardship. Yes, but it was also a land of second chances. And as the wind howled on, Eliza Thornton couldn't shake the feeling that hers had just stumbled through her door. The Montana dawn broke grey and heavy. The storm's fury softened to a restless murmur, as if the wind itself were too exhausted to keep screaming. Inside the Thornton cabin, the fire had dwindled to embers, casting a faint glow over the stranger who lay on the rug, his chest rising with shallow but steady breaths. Eliza sat slumped in her chair, the rifle still within reach, her eyes burning from a night without sleep. Clara and Samuel curled together under a blanket nearby, their soft snores a fragile reminder of innocence in a world that offered so little of it. The air smelled of damp wood and the sharp tang of yarrow, the herb Eliza had used to staunch the stranger's bleeding, a sacrifice of her most precious resource for a man whose name she didn't even know. She studied him in the dim light, his face rugged yet softened by the vulnerability of near death. His dark hair fell in tangled waves across his brow, and a faint scar curved along his jaw, hinting at a life not unacquainted with danger. Who was he? A drifter? A lawman? Or something worse? The blood-stained coat and the bullet wound suggested trouble, and trouble was the last thing her family needed. Yet, as she watched the slow rhythm of his breathing, a strange warmth flickered in her chest, a spark of hope, or perhaps foolishness, that this man might be more than the chaos he'd brought to her doorstep. A groan broke her thoughts, and his eyes fluttered open, hazel and piercing, despite the haze of pain. He tried to sit up, wincing as his hand pressed against the bandage on his side. "Where am I?" he rasped, his voice rough as gravel but laced with a quiet strength. Eliza leaned forward, her tone firm but not unkind. "You're in my home, and you're lucky to be alive. Don't move too much. You'll tear the stitches." He blinked, taking in the cramped cabin, the children sleeping nearby, and the woman before him, her face a map of resilience and wariness. "I'm obliged," he said, his words halting. "Name's Nathan Caldwell." The name struck a chord, though Eliza couldn't place why. It carried weight, like a story half remembered. "Eliza Thornton," she replied, her voice steady despite the questions swirling in her mind. "These are my children, Clara and Samuel. You collapsed on my porch last night, bleeding like a stuck pig. Care to tell me why?" Nathan's gaze flickered, a shadow passing over his face. "It's complicated," he said, his eyes drifting to the window where snow still clung to the frame. "I was riding from Silver Creek when I got ambushed. Didn't see 'em coming." Silver Creek, Eliza's brow furrowed. The name was familiar, a prosperous ranch some miles off, whispered about in town as a place of wealth and mystery. "You're from that outfit?" He nodded, a faint grimace crossing his lips. "Own it, or what's left of it." Her heart skipped. The owner of Silver Creek, here in her cabin, it seemed too wild to believe. Yet his quiet authority, even wounded, suggested a man used to command. But there was no time to press further. Clara stirred, rubbing her eyes as she sat up. "Mama, is he awake?" she asked, her voice bright with curiosity. She scrambled to her feet, peering at Nathan with a mix of awe and caution. "He is," Eliza said, softening her tone. "Clara, fetch some water. He'll need it." As Clara scurried to the bucket, Samuel woke too, his small face lighting up at the sight of the stranger. "Are you a cowboy?" he asked, his voice brimming with the kind of wonder only a child could muster in such a moment. Nathan chuckled, a low, warm sound that seemed to surprise even him. "Something like that. Kid. Used to be, at least." Eliza watched the exchange, her guard still up but softened by the way Nathan's eyes crinkled at the corners. A spark of kindness beneath the pain. She handed him a tin cup of water, her fingers brushing his for a moment calloused, like hers, but warm in a way that sent an unexpected shiver through her. "Careful now," she said, pulling back. "You're not out of the woods yet." The morning wore on, and Nathan drifted in and out of sleep, his strength returning in fits and starts. Eliza kept busy, tending to the fire and checking the barn, where the cows lowed mournfully, their milk barely enough to fill a pail. Clara and Samuel hovered near Nathan, their curiosity outweighing their fear. By midday, he was strong enough to sit up, propped against the wall. And Eliza decided it was time for answers. "You said you were ambushed," she began, stirring a pot of thin porridge, their last meal, unless she could barter for more. "Who'd want you dead?" Nathan's jaw tightened, his gaze distant. "Men who want what's mine. Silver Creek's got good land. Water rights things worth killing for out here." She nodded, understanding all too well. Land was life in Montana, and men like that didn't hesitate to spill blood for it, and the bullet in you, that they're doing. He hesitated, then nodded. "Victor Grayson's men. He's an old partner turned sour, wants the ranch, and he don't care how he gets it." The name sent a chill through her. Victor Grayson was no stranger to the folks in town, a man with a smile like a snake and a reputation for greed. If he was after Nathan, trouble wasn't far behind. Clara, who'd been listening quietly, piped up, "Why don't you fight him? You're a rancher, aren't you? You must be strong." Nathan's lips twitched, a hint of a smile. "Fighting's not always about strength, little lady. Sometimes it's about knowing when to run and when to stand your ground." Samuel's eyes widened. "Did you run? Had to?" Nathan admitted, his voice low. "But I ain't done standing." Eliza's heart stirred at his words, a mix of admiration and unease. He was a man with a past, that much was clear, and she wasn't sure she wanted it spilling into her already fragile world. Yet, as she watched him talk to her children, his voice gentle despite his rough exterior, she felt a pull she couldn't name, a longing for something more than survival. That afternoon, Nathan insisted on helping, though he could barely stand. He carved a small wooden horse for Samuel, teaching him how to hold the knife steady, and showed Clara how to tally numbers on a scrap of paper, his patience endless, even as he winced with every movement. Eliza watched from the doorway, her arms crossed, torn between gratitude and suspicion. He was good with them, too good, and it made her wonder what kind of man could be both a target and a teacher. As dusk fell, the wind picked up again, rattling the cabin's loose boards. Nathan's eyes kept drifting to the window, as if expecting shadows to emerge from the snow. Eliza noticed, her own nerves fraying. "You think they're coming for you?" she asked quietly when the children were out of earshot. He met her gaze, his expression grim. If they find me, they'll find you too. I'm sorry for that. Her stomach twisted, but she squared her shoulders. We've faced worse than a few hired guns. This is our home, and I'll protect it. He studied her, a flicker of respect in his eyes. You're tougher than you look, Eliza Thornton. She snorted, a spark of defiance breaking through her fear. You don't know the half of it. That night, as the children slept and the fire burned low, Eliza sat by Nathan's side, the rifle across her lap. The storm outside was a distant roar now, but a new storm was brewing, one of secrets, danger, and an unexpected warmth that flickered between two strangers bound by a single act of mercy. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in months, she felt something besides despair, a spark, faint but fierce, that maybe, just maybe, they could face it together. The Montana night settled heavy over the Thornton cabin, the wind's restless howl a constant reminder of the world's indifference. Inside, the fire cast long shadows across the walls, dancing over Nathan Caldwell's face as he lay propped against the wall. His eyes sharp despite the pain that lingered in his frame. Eliza sat nearby, her rifle a silent sentinel across her lap, her gaze flickering between the stranger she'd saved and the darkness beyond the window. Clara and Samuel slept soundly, their small forms tucked under a patched blanket, unaware of the storm, both literal and figurative, brewing just beyond their fragile sanctuary. The air was thick with unspoken questions, and Eliza's heart thudded with a mix of resolve and dread. Nathan's words from earlier echoed in her mind. If they find me, they'll find you too. She'd faced hunger, grief, and the threat of losing her home. But this was different, a shadow with a name. Victor Grayson, and the promise of violence trailing in his wake. Nathan stirred, his voice low but steady. You should sleep, Eliza. You've done more than enough keeping me alive. She shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. Sleep's a luxury I can't afford right now, not with you bringing trouble to my door. He winced, not from his wound but from her words, and for a moment, she regretted their sharpness. But before he could respond, a new sound cut through the night, not the wind, but the crunch of boots on snow, deliberate and close. Eliza's breath caught, her fingers tightening around the rifle. Nathan's head snapped toward the window, his body tensing like a coiled spring. Stay down, she hissed, rising silently and creeping to the window. She peered through a crack in the shutter, her heart pounding as she spotted three figures moving through the snow, their silhouettes dark against the moon's faint glow. They carried rifles, their steps cautious but purposeful, and the glint of a badge, or perhaps a spur, caught the light. Grayson's men. She was sure of it. Nathan struggled to his feet, ignoring her sharp glance. They're here for me, he whispered, his voice taut with urgency. You and the kids get to the root cellar, now. I'm not leaving you to face them alone, she snapped, her voice barely above a breath. This is my home, Nathan. I fight for it. His eyes met hers, a storm of gratitude and frustration swirling within them. You're stubborn as a mule, woman. Learned it the hard way, she shot back, but there was no time for banter. The footsteps grew louder, circling the cabin like wolves closing in on prey. Eliza's mind raced, calculating their odds. The cellar was too small to hide them all, and the barn was too far in this storm. Her eyes darted to the children, still sleeping, and a fierce protectiveness surged within her. She'd lost Daniel to sickness. She wouldn't lose Clara and Samuel to bullets. "Clara, Samuel, wake up," she whispered, shaking them gently. Their eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to fear as they saw the rifle in her hands. "Stay low and quiet. We've got company." Clara's lip trembled, but she nodded, pulling Samuel close. Nathan, leaning heavily against the wall, gestured to a loose floorboard near the hearth. "Got anything we can use? Ammunition, a knife." Eliza hesitated, then pried up the board, revealing a small cache, Daniel's old hunting knife, and a handful of bullets. She passed them to Nathan, their fingers brushing in a fleeting moment of connection that sent a jolt through her. "Even now, you know how to use these?" she asked. "Better than most," he replied, a grim smile tugging at his lips as he checked the knife's edge. A sharp knock rattled the door, followed by a voice, low and menacing. "Open up, ma'am. We know he's in there. Hand him over, and no one gets hurt." Eliza's blood ran cold, but she squared her shoulders, her voice steady as she called back. "Ain't no one here but me and my kids. You're trespassing." The man outside laughed, a cruel sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Don't play coy, widow. Nathan Caldwell's worth a pretty penny, dead or alive. Open the door, or we'll burn this shack to the ground." Nathan's face darkened, and he whispered, "That's Jace, Grayson's right hand. He don't bluff." Eliza's mind whirled, searching for a way out. The cabin was a tinderbox, one spark, and it'd go up in flames, taking everything she'd fought for. But surrender wasn't in her blood. She gestured to the back window, barely wide enough for a child. "Clara, Samuel, crawl out and hide in the woodpile. Don't come out till I call." Clara's eyes widened, but she nodded, ushering Samuel toward the window. Eliza helped them through, her heart twisting as their small figures disappeared into the snow. She turned back to Nathan, who was now standing, the knife tucked into his belt, his face set with a determination that mirrored her own. "Got a plan?" he asked, his voice steady despite the pain etched into his features. "Stall them," she said, her mind racing. "There's a ditch by the barn, they'll have to cross it to get to the back. We can hold them here." Nathan nodded, and together they positioned themselves by the door. Eliza with her rifle, Nathan with the knife and a fire poker he'd grabbed from the hearth. The tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with every second. Another knock, louder now, followed by the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. "Last chance," Jace bellowed. "Open the door, or we come in shooting." Eliza's heart thundered, but her hands were steady as she aimed at the door. "You take one step inside, and you'll meet my husband's old friend," she called, patting the rifle. "He don't miss." Silence followed, heavy and oppressive. Then a sudden crash. As the door splintered under a heavy boot, Eliza fired, the shot deafening in the small space, and a yelp of pain came from outside. Nathan lunged forward, slamming the door shut and shoving a chair against it, but the wood groaned under another blow. "They're circling," Nathan hissed, glancing at the window. Sure enough, shadows moved outside, splitting up to flank the cabin. Eliza's stomach dropped 3 against 2, and her children out there in the cold. But then, A shout from the yard broke the chaos. "Jace, look out!" one of the men yelled, followed by the sound of a struggle. Eliza risked a glance through the shutter and saw a figure, a man, not one of Grayson's, grappling with one of the attackers in the snow. The stranger was tall, cloaked in a dark coat, his movements swift and precise as he disarmed the thug with a single blow. "Who the hell is that?" Nathan muttered, his eyes narrowing. Eliza had no answer, but hope flared in her chest. The newcomer shouted, his voice carrying over the wind. "Sheriff's men, stand down, or you're done for." The attackers froze, caught off guard, and Eliza seized the moment. She fired another shot through the window, grazing one of the men, who cursed and stumbled back. Nathan kicked the chair aside and flung the door open, brandishing the poker like a sword. "Get out!" he roared, his voice raw with defiance. Jace hesitated, then spat into the snow. "This ain't over." "Caldwell," he snarled before signaling his men to retreat. They melted into the night, their footsteps fading as quickly as they'd come. Eliza's knees buckled, the rifle slipping from her hands as she sank to the floor. Nathan knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, warm and grounding. "You all right?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. She nodded, though her hands trembled. "The kids," she whispered, scrambling to her feet and rushing to the woodpile. "Clara, Samuel." They emerged, shivering but unharmed, and threw themselves into her arms. Eliza held them tight, tears stinging her eyes as relief flooded her. The stranger from the yard approached, his face weathered but kind, a sheriff's badge glinting on his chest. "Name's Tom Whitaker," he said, tipping his hat. "Heard Grayson's men were sniffing around. Thought I'd check on you." Eliza's gaze flicked to Nathan, who looked as stunned as she felt. "You're late, Tom," he said, a wry edge to his voice. Whitaker grinned. "Better late than never." As the sheriff helped secure the cabin, Eliza's mind spun with questions. Who was Nathan, really, to have a sheriff watching his back? And why had Grayson's men fled so quickly? The night had spared them, but the danger was far from gone, and the stranger at her side was more mystery than man. A mystery she wasn't sure she could afford to unravel, yet couldn't bear to let go. The Montana dawn crept over the horizon, pale and timid, as if unsure whether to face the wreckage of the night before. The Thornton cabin stood defiant, its splintered door a testament to the battle won, but the air inside was thick with the weight of what might come next. Eliza knelt by the hearth, stoking the fire back to life, her hands still trembling from the memory of gunfire and the relief of her children's safety. Clara and Samuel sat close, their eyes wide but bright, whispering about the mysterious sheriff who'd appeared like a guardian angel in the snow. Nathan leaned against the wall, his wound bandaged but his face etched with a tension that hadn't eased. Even with the retreat of Grayson's men, Sheriff Tom Whitaker stood by the door, his badge glinting faintly as he scanned the yard for any lingering threats. Eliza's mind churned as she poured weak coffee into tin mugs, the last of her precious grounds. The sheriff's arrival had saved them, but his familiarity with Nathan raised more questions than answers. She handed a mug to Whitaker, her voice steady despite the storm of doubt within her. "You got a habit of showing up just when things get hairy." "Sheriff." "Care to explain how you knew to come?" Whitaker took the mug with a nod, his weathered face breaking into a lopsided grin. Let's just say I've been keeping an eye on Nate here. Silver Creek's got more enemies than a rattler in a hen house, and I figured trouble'd find him sooner or later. Nathan shot him a look, half exasperated, half amused. You're not wrong, Tom, but your timing could use some work. Eliza's gaze flicked between them, her suspicion sharpening. So you two go way back. That don't explain why Grayson's men are hunting you like a prize buck, Nathan. Or why I'm now caught in the middle of it. Nathan's jaw tightened, his eyes dropping to the floor. I didn't mean to drag you into this, Eliza. I owe you more than I can repay. Before she could press further, Samuel piped up, his voice cutting through the tension like a sunbeam. Mama, can Mr. Nathan stay? He's good at carving, and he don't yell like old Mr. Jenkins in town when I drop things. Clara elbowed him, her cheeks flushing. Samuel, hush. You can't just ask folks to move in like they're stray puppies. The adults chuckled, the sound a brief reprieve from the weight of the night. Even Nathan's lips twitched, though his eyes still carried a shadow. Appreciate the vote of confidence, kid, he said, ruffling Samuel's hair. But I ain't exactly housebroken. Eliza snorted, the humor catching her off guard. But the moment was fleeting. Whitaker cleared his throat, his tone turning serious. Nate, we need to talk about that paper you were carrying. If Grayson's men are this bold, they know you've got it. Eliza's ears pricked up. Paper, she asked, her voice sharp. What paper? Nathan hesitated, his hand brushing the bandage on his side as if it pained him more than the wound. It's a deed. Proof that Silver Creek's mine. Fair and square. Grayson's been claiming I cheated him out of it years ago. That paper's the only thing keeping him from taking it all. Her heart sank. A deed worth killing for. That explained the ambush, the blood, the men at her door. And you brought that trouble here, she said, her voice low, not accusing but heavy with the weight of their reality. I didn't plan on collapsing at your doorstep, Nathan replied, his tone earnest. But I'm here now, and I'll make it right, how she demanded, crossing her arms. My kids were out in the snow last night, hiding from men with guns because of you. Whitaker raised a hand, his voice calm but firm. Let's not start pointing fingers. Nate's got a plan, don't you? Nathan nodded, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. I can pay off your mortgage. Eliza, Silver Creek's got enough to cover it, and then some. You've saved my life, I owe you that much. The offer hit her like a gust of wind, stealing her breath. Pay off the mortgage. It was a lifeline, a chance to keep her home, to give Clara and Samuel a future. But pride warred with desperation in her chest. She'd fought tooth and nail to survive on her own terms, and accepting charity, even from a man she'd saved, felt like admitting defeat. I don't take handouts, she said, her voice sharper than intended. We've made it this far without anyone's pity. It ain't pity, Nathan shot back, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. It's a partnership. You've got land, grit, and a head for work. Silver Creek could use someone like you managing a new operation. Maybe cattle. You'd earn wages, a share of the profits. No charity, just business. Clara's eyes lit up. Mama, we could have cows again. And I could learn to ride proper, like a real cowgirl. Samuel bounced on his toes. And I could help with the horses. Mr. Nathan, you got horses. Right. Nathan grinned, the tension easing for a moment. More than you can count. Sam, and one's got your name on it, if your mama says yes. Eliza's cheeks warmed, caught off guard by the warmth in his voice and the way her children looked at him like he was already part of their world. But the moment shattered as a sharp crack echoed from the yard, followed by the unmistakable whinny of a horse in distress. Whitaker was at the window in an instant, his hand on his revolver. "Stay here," he barked, slipping out the door before Eliza could protest. Nathan struggled to his feet, ignoring her glare. "I'm not letting him go alone," he said, grabbing the fire poker. "You're barely standing," she snapped. But her words fell on deaf ears as he followed Whitaker into the snow. Eliza grabbed her rifle, her heart pounding as she peered out the window. The yard was a mess of tracks, and one of their cows lay sprawled near the barn, its leg caught in a broken fence. Whitaker knelt beside it, while Nathan scanned the horizon, his posture tense. But what caught Eliza's eye was a scrap of paper pinned to the barn door, fluttering in the wind. She stepped outside, the cold biting her skin as she approached the barn. The paper was a wanted poster, crude but clear, with Nathan's face sketched in rough lines. Wanted Nathan Caldwell, $500 reward, dead or alive. Her stomach twisted. Was he a rancher, a lawman, or an outlaw? The man she'd saved, who'd carved toys for her son and offered her a future, was a mystery wrapped in danger. Whitaker joined her, his face grim. "Grayson's playing dirty. This is a message he's not done with Nate. Or with us," Eliza said, her voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at Nathan, who stood a few paces away, his eyes locked on the poster. For a moment, their gazes met, and she saw something raw in him. Regret, resolve, and something deeper, something that made her heart stutter. Mama Clara's voice broke the silence, and Eliza turned to see her daughter standing in the doorway, holding a small wooden carving, a horse. Whittled with care, Mr. Nathan made this for Sam, but he dropped it. "Can I give it back?" Eliza's throat tightened, the absurdity of the moment clashing with the danger. Here they were, staring down a bounty, and her daughter was worried about a toy. She forced a smile, her voice soft. "Go on, sweetheart, but stay close." As Clara scampered to Nathan, Eliza clutched the poster, her mind racing. The drama of the night had only deepened, and the awkward dance of trust and suspicion between her and Nathan was growing more tangled by the hour. A laugh escaped her, brittle but real, at the thought of her life widowed, broke, and now hiding a wanted man who might just be her salvation. The West had a way of turning everything upside down, and she was starting to wonder if she'd ever find her footing again. The Montana morning hung heavy with the scent of snow and pine, the air sharp enough to cut through the haze of fear that lingered in the Thornton cabin. Eliza stood in the doorway, the wanted poster crumpled in her fist, its ink smudged, but Nathan's sketched face still staring back at her. A silent accusation. The cow in the yard lowed mournfully, its leg freed from the fence by Sheriff Whitaker's steady hands. But the damage was done, another loss in a season that had taken too much already. Clara and Samuel hovered near Nathan, who knelt to hand Samuel the wooden horse, his smile soft but strained, as if he felt the weight of Eliza's gaze. The sheriff had retreated to the barn to check for more signs of Grayson's men, leaving a charged silence between the widow and the wounded stranger who'd turned her world upside down. Eliza's heart was a tangle of emotions: anger at the danger Nathan brought, gratitude for his offer to save her home, and something else, something warm and unsettling that stirred when his eyes met hers. She tucked the poster into her apron, her voice low to keep the children from hearing. "This paper says you're worth $500. Nathan Caldwell, dead or alive. You care to tell me what kind of man's got that kind of price on his head?" Nathan rose slowly, wincing as he pressed a hand to his bandaged side, his hazel eyes searching hers. "The kind who's got something worth fighting for," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I'm no saint, Eliza, but I'm no outlaw either. That poster's Grayson's doing lies to turn folks against me. I swear it." She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust the man who'd carved toys for her children and offered her a lifeline. But doubt gnawed at her. "Swearing's easy," she said, stepping closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Truth's harder." He held her gaze, unflinching, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. The crackle of the fire, the faint warmth of his breath in the cold air, the way his presence filled the room like a storm held at bay. "Then let me prove it," he said, his voice low, almost intimate. "Stay with me through this, and I'll show you who I am." Her breath hitched, caught off guard by the heat in his words, the way they seemed to reach beyond promise of land or safety. She turned away, her cheeks warming despite the chill, and busied herself with the fire to hide the flush creeping up her neck. "Clara, Samuel, go check the cow's water," she called, needing a moment to steady herself. The children scampered off, their laughter a fleeting balm against the tension. Nathan stepped closer, his shadow falling over her as she knelt by the hearth. "Eliza," he said softly, "I know I've brought you trouble, but I see the way you fight for those kids, for this place. Let me fight for you." She stood, brushing ash from her hands, and faced him, her heart pounding. He was closer now, close enough that she could smell the leather of his coat, the faint musk of sweat and snow. His eyes held hers, and for a moment she saw not just the rancher or the fugitive, but a man who'd known loss, who carried it in the lines of his face. The same way she did. The air between them crackled, charged with an unspoken pull that made her skin tingle. "I don't need saving," she said, her voice softer than she meant, betraying the tremor of something deeper. "But I won't turn away help. Not for my kids." He nodded, a slow, deliberate motion, and reached out, his fingers brushing her arm, a touch so light it could have been the wind. Yet it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "Then we're partners," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to settle in her bones. The moment hung, fragile and electric, until Clara's voice broke through, calling from the barn. "Mama, the calf's standing." Eliza stepped back, her heart racing, and forced a smile as she turned toward the door. "Coming, sweetheart," she called, grateful for the interruption, but shaken by the warmth lingering where Nathan's hand had been. The day unfolded in a flurry of small tasks, each one a distraction from the unspoken current between them. Nathan, despite his wound, insisted on helping, hauling firewood with Samuel trailing behind, mimicking his strides. Clara followed too, asking Nathan endless questions about Silver Creek, her eyes bright with dreams of a life beyond their struggling farm. Eliza watched from the porch, her hands busy with mending, but her thoughts on Nathan, the way his shirt clung to his shoulders as he worked, the quiet strength in his movements, the way his laugh seemed to light up her children's faces. By dusk, the cabin felt warmer, not just from the fire, but from the strange, tentative bond forming within its walls. Nathan joined them for a sparse supper of cornbread and milk, and as they sat around the rough table, he told stories of his late wife, Amelia, his voice softening with each memory. She loved morning glories, he said, his eyes distant, said they reminded her to keep blooming, no matter how hard the day. Clara tilted her head, her fork pausing. "That's beautiful, Mr. Nathan. Did she teach you to carve?" He chuckled, a sound that warmed the room. "She tried, said I was better at making a mess than a masterpiece." Eliza smiled despite herself, the image of Nathan fumbling with a carving knife oddly endearing. But the moment was fleeting. Whitaker returned, his face grim as he held up a crumpled note. "Found this tacked to a tree out back," he said, handing it to Nathan. Eliza leaned over, her shoulder brushing Nathan's as they read the scrawled words, "Caldwell, you can't hide forever. Silver Creek's mine. Leave, or the widow pays." Her blood ran cold, the threat a knife to her heart. Nathan's hand clenched, crumpling the note, and for a moment she saw not just anger but fear in his eyes, fear for her, for Clara, for Samuel. "We need to move you," Whitaker said, his voice low. "Grayson's men won't stop." Eliza's stomach twisted, but she straightened, her voice firm. "This is my home. I'm not running." Nathan turned to her, his gaze intense, a mix of admiration and something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken again. "Then we fight," he said, his hand resting on the table, inches from hers. "Together." She nodded, her fingers brushing his. A deliberate touch this time, sealing their pact in the flickering firelight. The danger was closer than ever, but so was something else, a connection that felt reckless, forbidden, yet undeniable, like a spark in a dry field, threatening to ignite everything she'd fought to protect. As the night deepened, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that Nathan Caldwell was both her greatest risk and her only hope. And the line between the two was growing dangerously thin. The Montana night pressed close, the cabin's walls creaking under the weight of a silence that felt alive with secrets. Eliza sat at the rough-hewn table, her fingers still tingling from the fleeting touch of Nathan's hand, a gesture that had sealed their pact to face the looming threat together. The fire cast a warm glow, but it did little to ease the chill of the note from Grayson's men, its words a venomous promise, "Leave, or the widow pays." Clara and Samuel slept fitfully in the corner, their small forms curled under a blanket, unaware of the danger that clung to their fragile world. Sheriff Whitaker stood by the door, his revolver cleaned and ready, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the window. Nathan sat across from Eliza, his face a mask of determination, but the flicker in his hazel eyes betrayed a storm of his own, one she couldn't yet name. "We'll need a plan," Whitaker said, breaking the quiet, his voice low to avoid waking the children. "Grayson's men are bold, but they're not stupid. They'll come back, and soon." Eliza nodded, her mind racing. "The ditch by the barn, it's our best defense. We can set traps, maybe rig some wire to slow them down." Nathan's lips curved, a spark of admiration in his gaze. "You've got a head for this." "Eliza." Most folks would have run by now. She met his eyes, her heart stuttering at the warmth there, but she pushed it aside. "Running's not an option when it's all you've got," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "This land's all I have left of Daniel. I won't let Grayson take it." Nathan's expression softened, and he leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You're not alone in this anymore. I meant what I said, partners." The word hung between them, heavy with possibility, and for a moment the world outside faded, the threats, the cold, the weight of survival. Eliza's breath caught, the air charged with an unspoken promise that made her skin prickle. But before she could respond, a faint rustle came from the floorboards near Nathan's feet, so soft it might have been the wind. She froze, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle propped nearby. Nathan's eyes narrowed, catching the sound too. He gestured for silence, then knelt, his movements slow despite the pain in his side. He pried up a loose board, revealing a small, dusty tin hidden beneath a relic of Daniel's, one Eliza hadn't touched since his death. Her heart thudded as Nathan opened it, pulling out a folded letter, its edges yellowed but sealed with wax. The imprint of a morning glory flower, unmistakable. "What's this?" Nathan asked, his voice barely above a breath as he handed it to her. Eliza's hands trembled as she took it, her fingers tracing the seal. "Daniel's," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "He hid things sometimes, letters, keepsakes. I thought I'd found them all." She broke the seal, her eyes scanning the faded ink, and the words hit her like a thunderclap. "My dearest Eliza, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry. There's a truth I never told you, one I swore to keep for a friend. Silver Creek's deed, it's tied to our land. I promised Nathan Caldwell I'd guard it, but if he's come to you, trust him. He's a good man, caught in a bad fight. The deed's hidden in the old oak by the creek, wrapped in oilcloth. Keep it safe and forgive me." Her breath caught, the letter slipping from her fingers as she stared at Nathan, her mind reeling. "You knew Daniel?" she asked, her voice a mix of shock and betrayal. "You came here, bleeding on my porch, and you didn't tell me you were tied to my husband." Nathan's face paled, his eyes wide with a mix of guilt and urgency. "Eliza, I swear, I didn't know this place was yours until I woke up here. Daniel and I were friends, years back. He helped me stake my claim on Silver Creek, kept the deed safe when Grayson turned on me. I never meant to keep it from you." Whitaker stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "That's why Grayson's after you. Nate, he knows Daniel had the deed, and he thinks you've got it now." Eliza's head spun, the twist cutting deeper than any bullet. Daniel had carried this secret to his grave, tying their family to a feud she'd never known existed. And Nathan, this man who'd stirred her heart, who'd fought beside her, was no stranger at all, but a piece of her past, woven into the very land she was fighting for. Anger flared, hot and sharp, but so did something else, a flicker of understanding, of connection, that made her chest ache. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "All this time, you let me think you were just some drifter, when you knew my husband Nathan reached for her hand." But she pulled back, her eyes blazing. "I wanted to," he said, his voice raw. "But I didn't know how. Daniel asked me to keep you out of it, to keep you safe. When I saw you, I couldn't walk away. Clara stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly, and Eliza lowered her voice, her anger tempered by the need to protect her children. Safe, she hissed. Grayson's men are hunting us because of you, because of this. She held up the letter, her hand shaking. Whitaker cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the tension. We don't have time for this. If that deed's out there, we need to find it before Grayson does. Eliza's gaze flicked to the window, where the first light of dawn touched the snow. The old oak by the creek was a mile off, a dangerous trek with Grayson's men circling. But the deed was her family's leverage, a piece of Daniel's legacy she couldn't let slip away. Fine, she said, her voice steel. We go at first light, but Nathan, you owe me answers, all of them. He nodded, his eyes heavy with regret, but burning with resolve. You'll have them, I promise, as they prepared. Eliza's mind raced, the twist of Daniel's secret reshaping everything she thought she knew. Nathan wasn't just a stranger who'd stumbled into her life, he was a thread in its fabric, tied to her past and, perhaps, her future. The danger was closer now, the stakes higher, but so was the pull between them, a quiet fire that burned despite the betrayal. She tucked the letter into her apron, next to the wanted poster, and steeled herself for what lay ahead. The creek held answers, but it also held peril, and Eliza Thornton was done being caught off guard. The Montana dawn broke cold and sharp, painting the snow-dusted plains in hues of grey and gold, as if the land itself held its breath for what was to come. Eliza Thornton trudged toward the creek, her boots crunching through the frost, the weight of Daniel's letter and Nathan's wanted poster heavy in her apron. The old oak, its gnarled branches stark against the sky, stood a mile off, a silent sentinel guarding secrets that could save or doom her family. Nathan walked beside her, his steps uneven from his wound but resolute, his face set with a determination that both steadied and unnerved her. Sheriff Whitaker trailed behind, his revolver at the ready, while Clara and Samuel stayed back at the cabin under the watchful eye of a neighbor, their small faces pale with worry as they'd waved goodbye. The revelation of Daniel's connection to Nathan still stung, a raw wound in Eliza's heart, but the promise of the deed, the key to her land and Nathan's Silver Creek, drove her forward through the biting cold. The air between her and Nathan was thick with unspoken words, the tension from last night's confrontation lingering like smoke. She glanced at him, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of Grayson's men. "You'd better not be leading me into a trap, Caldwell," she said, her voice low but sharp, cutting through the quiet. "I've had enough surprises for one lifetime." Nathan's lips twitched, a faint spark of humor breaking through his grim expression. "If I was aiming to trap you, Eliza, I'd have picked a warmer day. This cold's likely to freeze my good intentions solid." She snorted, the sound escaping before she could stop it, and for a moment the weight on her chest eased. But the humor was fleeting, overshadowed by the memory of Daniel's letter and the danger that stalked them. "You and Daniel," she said, her voice softening. "You kept this from me." Why Nathan's gaze dropped to the snow, his breath visible in the frosty air. "He wanted to protect you. Said you were the strongest woman he'd ever known. But even the strongest need shielding sometimes. I honored his wish, even if it meant lying by omission." Her throat tightened, torn between gratitude for Daniel's care and frustration at being left in the dark. I'm not some delicate flower, Nathan. I deserve to know. I see that now, he said, his voice low, earnest. And I'm sorry. The sincerity in his eyes made her heart stutter, but before she could respond, Whitaker hissed from behind. Quiet. Tracks. He pointed to a set of fresh boot prints cutting across the snow, leading toward the creek. Eliza's stomach twisted, her hand tightening around the rifle slung over her shoulder. Grayson's men, she whispered, her breath catching. Whitaker nodded, his face grim. Or someone they paid to snoop. Stay sharp. They crept forward, the oak's silhouette growing larger, its branches clawing at the sky. The creek gurgled softly, half frozen, its banks slick with ice. Eliza's pulse raced as they reached the tree, its trunk scarred and ancient, a testament to years of storms. Nathan knelt, his fingers probing the base where roots twisted into the earth, searching for the oilcloth Daniel's letter had described. Got something, he muttered, pulling free a small, wrapped bundle. He unwound it carefully, revealing a weathered document, the deed to Silver Creek, its edges frayed but the words clear, binding Nathan's claim and, inexplicably, her own land to it. Eliza's breath caught, relief warring with the weight of what it meant. This was their salvation, but also a beacon for Grayson's greed. A twig snapped nearby, and Eliza spun, her rifle raised. Just as a figure emerged from the brush, a lanky man with a scar across his cheek, his eyes gleaming with malice. Well, ain't this cozy, he drawled, his gun trained on them. Hand over the deed, Caldwell, and maybe the widow walks away. Nathan stepped in front of Eliza, his body a shield despite his wound. You're one of Grayson's, aren't you? He growled. Tell him he'll have to pry this from my cold hands. The man smirked, but before he could reply, Whitaker lunged from the shadows, tackling him to the ground. The two men grappled in the snow, fists flying, and Eliza's heart leapt into her throat as another figure appeared, a second thug, his rifle aimed at Nathan. Without thinking, she swung her own rifle up, firing a warning shot that grazed the man's hat, sending him scrambling for cover. Stay down, she shouted, her voice fierce. But the chaos was only beginning. Nathan grabbed her arm, pulling her behind the oak as bullets whizzed past, splintering bark. The deed slipped from his hand, fluttering into the snow. And Eliza's stomach dropped. Nathan, the deed, he cursed, diving for it. But the first thug broke free from Whitaker, lunging toward the paper. Eliza acted on instinct, tackling the man with the force that surprised even her, sending them both sprawling into the icy creek. The cold bit into her skin, soaking her dress. And the thug thrashed, his elbow catching her cheek. Pain flared, but she held on, her nails digging into his wrist until he yelped and dropped his knife. Eliza Nathan shouted, pulling her free as Whitaker subdued the second man, tying his hands with a rope from his belt. The deed lay safe in Nathan's hand, but Eliza's dress clung to her, wet and freezing, and she shivered violently, her teeth chattering. Nathan's eyes widened, and he shrugged off his coat, wrapping it around her shoulders. "You're gonna catch your death," he said, his voice rough with worry, his hands lingering on her arms. The warmth of his touch, even through the damp fabric, sent a shiver through her that wasn't entirely from the cold. She met his gaze, her cheeks burning despite the chill. "I'm fine," she muttered, but the words felt hollow as his hand stayed on her, steadying her in a way that made her heart race. The moment was absurdly awkward. Here they were, soaked and battered, surrounded by tied-up thugs, and yet the air between them crackled with something unspoken, something that made her want to lean closer despite the chaos. Whitaker cleared his throat, a wry grin breaking through his stern demeanor. "If you two are done making eyes at each other, we've got bigger problems. These boys won't be alone." Eliza stepped back, her face flaming, and Nathan coughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Right," he said, his voice gruff. "Let's get this deed back to the cabin and figure out our next move." As they trudged back, the thugs bound and trailing behind Whitaker. Eliza clutched Nathan's coat tighter, the scent of leather and pine clinging to it. The drama of the morning had left her shaken, but the deed in Nathan's hand was a lifeline, tying her to him in ways she hadn't expected. The awkward warmth of his touch lingered, a quiet promise amid the danger, and she couldn't help but laugh softly at the absurdity of it all, fighting off outlaws and blushing like a schoolgirl in the same breath. The West was a wild place, but it was starting to feel like home in a way she hadn't known she needed. The Montana sun climbed higher, casting a golden glow over the snow-draped plains as Eliza, Nathan, and Sheriff Whitaker trudged back to the Thornton cabin, the captured thugs stumbling behind them, their wrists bound tight. Eliza's damp dress clung to her skin, but Nathan's coat around her shoulders held a warmth that went beyond the fabric, its scent of leather and pine a quiet comfort amid the morning's chaos. The deed to Silver Creek, now safely tucked inside Nathan's shirt, was a hard-won prize, tying her land to his in a way that felt like fate or a challenge she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Clara and Samuel's laughter echoed from the cabin as they approached, a sound that steadied Eliza's heart, even as the weight of Grayson's threat lingered like a shadow. Inside, the cabin felt alive with the promise of a new day. Clara rushed to Eliza, her eyes wide with relief, while Samuel tugged at Nathan's sleeve, demanding to know if he'd fought off 100 bad guys. Nathan chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair, but his gaze kept drifting to Eliza, a silent question in his eyes. Whitaker secured the thugs in the barn, promising to haul them to town for questioning, but not before warning that Grayson wouldn't take this defeat lightly. "He'll come for you, Nate," he said, his voice low, "and he won't come alone." Eliza's stomach tightened, but she squared her shoulders, her resolve as unyielding as the oak by the creek. "Let him come," she said, her voice steady. "This is our home, and we'll fight for it." Nathan's eyes softened, a flicker of pride in his gaze. "Spoken like a true partner," he said. And the word carried a weight that made her pulse quicken, a reminder of the bond they'd forged in fire and frost. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Nathan, despite his wound, worked alongside Eliza to fortify the cabin, teaching Clara and Samuel how to reinforce the shutters and set up a makeshift alarm with twine and bells. He carved a small wooden saddle for Clara, etched with morning glories in honor of his late wife, Amelia, and gifted Samuel a sturdy stick horse, declaring him the fastest rider in Montana. The children's laughter filled the air, a melody that eased the ache in Eliza's heart, even as she braced for the storm she knew was coming. That storm arrived under a moonless sky. A week later, when the wind carried the distant thunder of hooves. Grayson's men, a dozen strong, swept toward the cabin, their torches casting an eerie glow across the snow. Eliza's heart pounded as she ushered Clara and Samuel into the root cellar, their small hands clinging to hers. "Stay quiet," she whispered, pressing a kiss to their foreheads. "We'll be all right." Nathan stood by the door, his face grim but resolute, the deed tucked safely in a tin under the floorboards. Whitaker had rallied a handful of Silver Creek's loyal hands, and together they formed a thin line of defense. Eliza gripped her rifle, her hand steady, despite the fear clawing at her chest. The air crackled with tension as Grayson himself rode forward, his voice cutting through the night like a blade. "Caldwell," he bellowed, "hand over the deed, and I'll spare the widow and her brats." Nathan stepped onto the porch, his voice calm but laced with steel. "You'll get nothing. Victor, this land's ours, and you're done." Grayson laughed, a cruel sound, and raised his torch, ready to signal his men. But Eliza had prepared for this. She lit a fuse they'd rigged to the irrigation ditch, a trick Nathan had taught her, and water surged from the creek, flooding the yard and turning the snow to slush. The attackers' horses reared, their charge faltering as Whitaker and the ranch hands opened fire, driving them back. The battle was fierce but swift, the night alive with shouts and gunfire. Eliza fought beside Nathan, her aim true, her heart fueled by a fierce love for her children and the home they'd built. Grayson's men, caught off guard by the flood and the defenders' resolve, scattered into the darkness, their leader cursing as he fled. By dawn, the yard was quiet, the torches extinguished, and Grayson's threat broken. Whitaker took Grayson into custody, his men rounded up and bound for trial. The deed was safe, and with it, Eliza's home and Nathan's claim. As spring crept over the plains, the snow melted, revealing patches of green that promised renewal. Nathan made good on his promise, paying off Eliza's mortgage and setting up a partnership to transform her farm into a thriving outpost of Silver Creek. She took on the role of manager, her days filled with purpose as she oversaw cattle and crops, her children growing strong under the wide Montana sky. One warm spring evening, under the same oak where they'd found the deed, Nathan knelt before Eliza, a simple ring carved with morning glories in his hand. "I've lost too much to hesitate," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You and the kids, you're my home now. Marry me." Eliza, tears stung her eyes, not from grief but from a joy she'd thought lost forever. "Yes," she whispered, and as he slipped the ring onto her finger, Clara and Samuel cheered, their laughter echoing through the trees. They married that summer, adopting Clara and Samuel as their own, and renamed the farm Morning Glory Ranch, a tribute to Amelia and the new life they'd built. Eliza, now carrying their first child together, began a journal in a leather-bound book Nathan gave her, chronicling their journey from a stormy night to a spring of hope. The ranch became a beacon of resilience, a testament to love forged in hardship, and a reminder that even in the wildest of places, a single act of kindness could bloom into a legacy. As the sun set over Morning Glory Ranch, Eliza stood on the porch, Nathan's arm around her, Clara and Samuel chasing fireflies in the yard. The West had tested them, broken them, and made them whole again. And in the quiet of that evening, with the stars winking above, Eliza knew they'd found something stronger than any storm each other.